website, so that took me a second, but it'll be worth it. We'll go through that quickly. Now, listen, let's go ahead and take a look at your grades so far. I've been very pleased. We have over half, just barely though, just barely over half the research papers in. All of the early turn-ins have been graded. None of the others have. I'll start on those later on tonight. So if they're filtering in, I'll try to have those read. We'll try to get all of them read by next Sunday night. That's a big ask. We might have to extend that into finals week. But nevertheless, there's a lot to do. Plus, I went through and updated all the grades last night. And I was pleased that some people now who are, I had one student actually go back and do the first assignment. Yay. So trying to get themselves to a passing grade, and they will, they'll do great. They did a good job, and they just got to work really, really hard. But with you guys, it's kind of important to know what's coming up. Now, I was a little disappointed when I graded this one, the Biden-Harris readings. I only had 19 people had that done by last night. So that means this has got to be done. And so I'm going to delay just a few days, just one day, this study guide for the lecture portion of this last unit. So get this thing finished. But also too, I still have 45 students who haven't done the research paper, and you see what it's doing to your grade. So if there's a priority, here's the priority. Get the research paper done first. It's going to have the biggest impact on your grade. Then do this reading, get your little short essays written there, and then do this one at the end. Okay, so do it in that order. Start here, make sure you have your research paper done, get this done, and get this done all by the drop dead date, the due date, and that's December 11th at midnight. Then I'll be working hard to get all of that graded, and then next week when we meet, you come to class. If there's any scores that are wrong, we can check them in real time and make sure everybody's got the grade they want, or that have earned rather. Okay, so that's kind of important. So that's why it took me a second or two to get here. So I wanted to update this so you know. Definitely do it in this order. This first, doesn't matter. Don't do any study guides till this is in. That will have the biggest impact on your grade. And then get this one done, and you're ready to rock and roll. But you've got to get it all done this week. Now, no final. So hopefully that gives you time to study your other classes too. And this won't be an overwhelming burden for you. If you kept up, you're thinking, give me that next study guide. I want to get it over with, right? So I'll give you that Tuesday night. If you've kept up, which about 45 students have, you know, they're just chomping at the bit. They want this last study guide because they want it done so they can focus on math, focus on science, focus on other classes. All right, well, now saying that, let's go ahead and kind of do our wrap up lecture, if you will. So we got a lot of things to wrap up. So as the term ends, this is the last lecture. Now I will be finishing the last part of this lecture on Wednesday. So there'll be, you know, about 20 minutes or so more lecture to wrap up this because it was too much to fit in and get it all in today. So as the term ends, okay, we now have had a successful democratic election in a republic, and it worked. The Republican portion, the Electoral College, Biden wins comfortably. And look at this margin now, it's grown. It is now, believe it or not, over 7 million vote difference. It was a thumping. It was, to use Trump's own words, right? It was a shellacking. So Trump now has lost back-to-back elections by almost 10 million votes. His percentage keeps dropping slightly. Now, this is pretty much now about where it's going to be because California, the reason numbers kept changing, California and other states didn't certify until like Friday. So California's votes now in. There may be a couple of states that still have to certify, and so the numbers might change a little bit. Maybe Mr. Trump in Arkansas, if they haven't certified, can pick up some more votes, who knows? But by the same token, this was a major, decisive victory. We've not seen this big of a gap, but one time since the year 2000. Since the year 2000, our elections have become really tight, really close. I'll try to give you some reasons today as to why that's possibly true. But we get these close elections. Well, the only person that's done better than Biden since the year 2000 was Obama in 2008. Mitt Romney, you're going to see today, actually got a much narrower verdict with Obama in 2012. He managed to cut that lead way down. And was really much closer election. It was still 51%, but it was much closer than 08. So only 08 had a bigger gap. So not only did Biden win in the Electoral College decisively, he won in the popular vote decisively, and he won in the percentage. Second biggest since 2000. So it's kind of a triple win. Nevertheless, we have a president who says this didn't happen. He goes, these weren't legal votes somehow, whatever, and he's challenging the election, which is really bizarre. In fact, I would go on to say that it's the most undemocratic, un-American, unconstitutional thing I've ever heard a president say. He got elected through this system. He should be proud of that victory. And now he's diminishing it by saying, yeah, but now it doesn't count. We don't do democracy anymore. We need to give it to me. Why? You lost. We're a democracy. So what's your beef with that? Look, here's the thing. Montesquieu gave us a path to understand this behavior, right? Number one, he said monarchies, right? You can have a monarchy. Remember when he wrote this, most of the European powers were monarchies, and they were working rather well. They were establishing colonies all over the world, whatever. They were starting to change and limit their power with the addition of parliaments and so on. And as long as they rely on the principle of virtue, they'll last. And that's what happened in England. England, they love their queen. Why? Because she serves with honor. She's there for the people, period. She doesn't need the money. She doesn't need the honor, whatever. She does it because she is a symbol of her country, and she's going to do the job because it benefits everyone. And she serves with honor. The royal family was a tremendous boost to the morale of the country during the Second World War and in crises ever since. Now, if you choose not to have monarchy, and there's a lot of reasons to get rid of monarchy, outlined in Common Sense by Thomas Paine. In other words, hereditary government can have lots of problems. The father may be a great king, the son may not be. So yeah, this hereditary thing might not be the smartest move. So what's the alternative to that? A republic is the next potential answer. And where you have like a Congress or a Senate and a House and governors that are locally elected that serve the people with virtue, that they do it because it's the right thing to do, not because they're going to make money or become rich or powerful, but because they're serving their country, right? And so one of the people that I think demonstrates this type of virtue more than any other that I've seen in Utah history and any history really is Mitt Romney in terms of politics. Here's a guy that ran for president, almost won. He would have made a great president. He'd been governor of Massachusetts. He had his own company. He was a tremendously successful business leader, came to Utah, saved the Utah Olympics from bankruptcy and scandal. That's why his ties are now to Utah. But then he goes on to run for president, did a great job running against a very popular president, Obama. But in that election, see, I love that election because no matter how we voted, it would have turned out okay. We'd have had a great president, no doubt about it. Then he decides to run for senator because he's alarmed at Mr. Trump, frankly. And he becomes the only senator in American history to vote to remove a president from his own political party when President Trump was impeached for trying to cheat on this year's elections with a foreign power, trying to extort a foreign power to dig up dirt on his potential political rival, Joe Biden and his son, Hunter, and using extortion and the power of his presidency, obstruction of justice, and also abuse of power. And he voted to remove. It was a great moment in history, and he'll be remembered for it. And then what's he doing right now? He's back in DC that has been deadlocked. Congress has been deadlocked. And he's trying to get Democrats and Republicans to work together, knowing that Joe Biden is going to be the next president, that maybe we can work together to get a lame duck law passed. And a lot of times in the lame duck, you can pass things that were impossible before the election because of politics. But now, without that political pressure, let's get almost $1 trillion passed to get the people out of this recession, out of this depression long enough to get to the new government so we can figure out what to do going forward. A temporary patch, if you will, on a really disastrous economy, and how we're going to pay for all the COVID shots and all that. So that's what he's doing right now. So what we're going to do is play an interview he had, and it's really, I think, an important, which shows the essence of what it means to lead with virtue. And here's Will Britzer on CNN. He's the commentator. He'll make some comments first that tie into this discussion, but I want you to listen very carefully. Put everything away and listen to your senator from Utah basically making history at every turn. He's a remarkable senator.
CNN has learned there have been multiple meetings over at the White House since the election to discuss presidential pardons. The meetings include a list of potential pardon cases to be considered and ideas of who else should be included in that list. Today over at the White House, President Trump wouldn't say whether he still has confidence in the Attorney General, William Barr. A source tells CNN the two had a contentious meeting this week after Barr told the Associated Press his Justice Department found no evidence of widespread voter fraud that would have changed the election outcome.
Now, two things here. One is I've never known a president to challenge a free and fair election and say it was fraudulent because he didn't win. Talk about the essence of a sore loser. But more important than that, he still has the power to pardon people. And that is a presidential power we haven't talked about yet. But we won't be in class for this. But sometime December, January, this could get really strange where he abuses his power to pardon people that don't deserve it. The pardon power should be reserved for acts of mercy. You know, acts of where maybe it was the sentence was too much for a particular crime, or the crime they committed, like maybe drug offenses and whatever, are no longer illegal in some states. The acts of mercy. Instead, it may be to get felons off of crimes that they actually should maybe go to jail for. Keep your eye on that one. That one's going to be another interesting little story in this rather roller coaster presidency. Then his attorney general, who's the top cop appointed by Trump. FBI, he's over that. He's over all the lawyers and whatever that do cases for the federal government. He's saying we couldn't find any widespread fraud. It's our job to look. We didn't find any. And Trump's really angry at him because he basically spoke the truth.
Here's what the president said today. Watch this.
Do you still have confidence in Bill Barr?
Ask me that in a number of weeks from now. Well, he hasn't done anything, so he hasn't looked. When he looks, he'll see the kind of evidence that right now you're seeing. They haven't looked very hard, which is a disappointment, to be honest with you, because it's massive fraud.
What he didn't say is that the Attorney General said not only the Justice Department, but the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI looked very carefully. They found no evidence of widespread fraud. Let's discuss all this and a lot more with the Republican Senator, former presidential nominee Mitt Romney of Utah. Senator, thank
you. Just contrast. I mean, if we had more time in the semester, I'd do a comparison and contrast between Donald Trump and Mitt Romney. Okay. And we listen to a speech of each, and it would be an interesting comparative essay. But look at somebody who, he doesn't need the money. He's one of the richest people in America. He doesn't have to do this. He's in his 70s now, but he's there because he wants to serve the people and he has a sense of virtue. Here we go.
Thank you so much for joining us. I know you got a lot going on up on the Hill right now. We have a lot to discuss. Yesterday on the coronavirus, it was the single deadliest day of the pandemic. More than 2,800 Americans were reported dead just yesterday alone. More than 100,000 people are hospitalized all across the country. The CDC director says the next 3 months will be, in his words, the most difficult time in the public health history of this nation. So here's the question, Senator. Where is the president's leadership? He's obsessed with everything else, not with this.
Well, this hasn't been the focus of his rhetoric, apparently, and I think it's a great human tragedy, without question. The extraordinary loss of life is heartbreaking, and in some respects unnecessary. Not in all respects, but we've relaxed our standards as individuals. Some states haven't had mask mandates. And from Washington, we have not had a consistent plan and plea for people to wear masks, to social distance, to take all the measures that would reduce the spread of this disease. It's unfortunate that this became a political issue. It's not political. This is public health. And unfortunately, we have not made that message clear enough to the American people, and people are dying because of it.
Yeah, the country's never been in worse shape since this pandemic erupted in January and February, early March. But there are still, as you well know, Senator, Republican governors are resisting basic health and safety measures, as you just described them. Your state of Utah only enacted a mask mandate last month after hospitals became overwhelmed. Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida says people in Florida, he actually says this, are happier without safety measures. Is this type of attitude costing thousands and thousands of American lives?
Well, no question that unless you take this very, very seriously and communicate that this is not a political matter, this is not a matter of liberty, this is a matter of safety and public health. And we have people who are very, very sick, many people in the hospital. We have people who have died and are dying. It's unacceptable. We needed to have a far clearer message from the very beginning that this was serious, that we should take every step we possibly could in order to constrain this virus's spread. And we haven't done that, and we're suffering the consequences even today.
Yeah, the president of the United States has been missing in action when it comes to this, and it's simply awful. As you know, Senator, vaccines are coming, and we're all very optimistic. They're coming very soon, but states all around the country, they need money to distribute these vaccines. 712,000 Americans filed for first-time unemployment benefits just last week alone, and millions are set to lose benefits right after Christmas. Bottom line, are you going to get a COVID relief bill done for the American people anytime soon?
Yeah, I'm quite confident that there will be a COVID relief measure. I know all the elements that.
Now we're going to pause it right there because he is the reason it's coming together. He's just got a group of Republican senators who are willing to work on it with Democrats, and he's trying to pull this thing together. And we need it. We need it bad right now and badly. And so I'm going to jump ahead to a later portion of the interview, but let you know he's fighting for you for money to the state in order to get the resources we need to get through the next 3-4 months.
We're currently negotiating.
Are you and your Senate colleagues, Senator Romney, ready to stay here in Washington until legislation is passed? Because as you know, people are suffering all over the country. You see these long, horrendous lines. People can't even put food on the table and feed their kids.
Absolutely. I think the members of the group that have been coming together, negotiating this package, have said, look, we're going to stay here right through the end of the year. We're not going to go home until this is done. And a significant portion of our legislation relates to food security, both getting help to farmers and ranchers, but also getting help to food banks, as well as the SNAP program, food stamp program. That's important for this package, as well as the other measures I mentioned.
So you're upbeat that maybe in the coming days you can pass $908 billion. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I believe you're either going to see the entire package, the $908 billion package, or you'll see leadership, meaning Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, and so forth. They'll come together and take pieces of that in the final bill that gets done, probably attached to an omnibus bill. But one way or the other, you're going to see unemployment insurance, help for small businesses, vaccine distribution. These elements are going to be included, I believe, before the end of the year.
This is so important. It's been near.
And the reason he's so important is he's kind of like that swing vote. And he can tip it, right? He's got Republicans, him and a couple of others that are willing to vote with the Democrats if necessary to get these things done. And so he becomes very important. And you could see right here, what a great president he would have made, right? I'm very happy to say I actually voted for this guy. He serves with honor. He serves with dignity. He serves with caring for the American people and with virtue.
Nearly a month, as you know, Senator, since the presidential election was called. But today, President Trump said he probably has enough votes to win every, this is his words, battleground state. As you know, nationally in the popular vote, he's lost by almost 7 million votes right now? How much damage is President Trump doing to our country, to our standing around the world by refusing to concede and alleging widespread fraud going on all over the country?
Well, the Attorney General has said there's no there. The courts have all looked at the evidence and said there's no evidence there. Now, of course, there are going to be circumstances where one or two or a handful or maybe even 100 ballots were incorrectly sent in or counted, and those things get adjusted and get fixed. But the idea of widespread fraud has simply not been shown to us. And if that evidence does exist, please show it to us. But at this stage, we don't see it. And so for the president or anyone else to go out and allege widespread fraud and say the election is rigged and the election was stolen, that obviously strikes at the very foundation of democracy here and around the world for that matter. People watch America. If we can't have a free and fair election, how can they have it in other nations of the world?
Yeah.
So this is critical for the whole cause of democracy. Russia and China have to be just laughing, smiling from ear to ear. This is critical for the preservation of the very democracy and freedom that's important for our country and for others.
Yeah, well said, because they are laughing. The adversaries of the United States, they're laughing at this, what the president of the United States is doing now to our reputation around the world by claiming widespread fraud in this presidential election. Another thing that is so disturbing, Senator, I'm sure you agree with me, is the president's false claims that they're leading to death threats to Democratic and Republican election workers at every level around the country. A Trump campaign lawyer said former election security official Chris Krebs, a Republican, should be shot. This is so dangerous. Could the president's words, what he's doing right now every single day, especially on Twitter, lead to more violence against these decent, hardworking, patriotic Americans?
I certainly hope not. I mean, it makes me very, very frightened for those people, and my heart goes out to them. They're courageous. They've stood up for what they believe is absolutely right. You have the Attorney General of the United States likewise saying that there's no evidence of the kind of widespread fraud that the president is talking about. But when he attacks election officials, I think he puts them at risk. I think that's very unfortunate. But look, the president has every right to pursue every legal avenue, to go to courts as he feels he can make his case. But if he doesn't have evidence that can convince a court, and if he doesn't have evidence that can convince the American people of widespread voter fraud, then making these accusations is only damaging the cause of freedom and putting people's lives at risk.
And that right there is your Senator, Mitt Romney. And I think we can all be very proud of him standing up. He's one of only 28 members of Congress that are Republican that have acknowledged that Biden has won. And he came out within 2 days and acknowledged that he won, and looking forward to working with him, as he says here in this next bit of the clip.
I know you got to run, Senator. One final question. Since the election, have you had a chance to speak with the president-elect of the United States, Joe Biden?
Not since the election, no. And actually, it's been quite a long time since I spoke with Joe Biden. He was kind enough to come speak at a conference of mine in Utah a couple of years ago. He was charming as always, and I look forward to working with him.
And you've accepted the fact that he will be the next president of the United States at noon on January 20th, Inauguration Day.
Yes.
Senator?
Now, there you go. And you have to accept the outcome. I mean, that's what democracy is. You know, when you lose by over 7 million votes, you should acknowledge that. And you should focus on the issue of the day, which is the coronavirus crisis, instead of focusing on your own self-interest. And so we're seeing, you know, like I said, a president who is losing day by day his legacy. And I don't get it, and no one does. But we do know this: despotisms, enslaved governments headed by dictators, rely on fear. And for some reason, a lot of Republicans, not Mitt Romney, but a lot of Republicans are afraid to challenge the president. You can't be afraid. You have to say what's right. And you'll be remembered for that. And it's kind of important. As we wrap up our little lecture here on the philosophical underpinnings of our democracy. To do this, we have to jump back to ancient Athens. And normally we spend a week on Athens. We have 5 or 6 lectures on this, and it's great. And it's a lot of fun. We have to do it in like 5 minutes here. But basically what happened is Athens was going through a lot of political turmoil, and they turned to Cleisthenes, a nobleman, to be their leader. And they basically is kind of like an appointed king, if you will. And while he is trying to do his best, a guy by the name of Isagoras, another nobleman, basically wants to get rid of him and put himself in as the new leader by force. And he enlists the help of the Spartans, who were no enemies, they were enemies of freedom, if you want to call it that. Anyway, the point is, Isagoras does take charge in a coup d'etat. A coup d'etat, and it's really important here, is a illegal seizure of power of the government, a coup d'etat. If Mr. Trump succeeds in overturning the outcome of the election and installing himself as president for another 4 years, that's a coup d'etat. That's a coup. Because the law in each state says who won, and you have to abide by the law. And this is being an illegal seizure. And that's what happened with Isagoras. Now, the people of Athens did not want to be dominated by Sparta and this new ruler. So they rose in revolt, the only ancient revolt of average people against their government in the ancient world. And they managed after 3 days to kick the Spartans out. Spartans went running. And Cleisthenes is brought back in. And he realizes now the people have taken the situation into their own hands. So the form of government before, where an aristocrat like him could rule, wasn't going to work anymore. So he invented a new form of government, which we now call democracy. He invented the vote that right now we're fighting to preserve and protect and defend here in the United States and under our Constitution. And so this is kind of where it all started. Now, we owe then the Greeks a lot in terms of our political discourse. Not only to give us things like the Olympics, but they also gave us a lot of terms, right? And one of them is tyrant. A tyrant is a single ruler with absolute power. If Mr. Trump is able to suddenly make himself president on January 20th, that's a tyrant. That's what that is. And so that, that's what our Constitution was created to protect against. The Greeks were really good at taking the different forms of government and dissecting them as to how they're different. They analyzed governments and they came up with words for it. So a lot of our political vocabulary that we just use nonchalantly in political science really came from the ancient Greeks. This is 500 BCE kind of thing. Let's go through some of them. The word tyrant, for example, right? Also, theocracy. They invented that term. These are all Greek terms. Ocracy means rule by. So rule by God, basically, theo, right? God in Greek. Basically, it's ruled by religious leaders. And if you go around the world today, there's several countries that fit that mold. For example, Iran is ruled by the religious leaders, right? You're going to need to know all these definitions, by the way, just so you know. You might want to get your camera out, take a picture while the slide's still on the screen, or, just run the lecture back. Aristocracy is ruled by the nobility. And that's really what Cleisthenes was when he started out. It was ruled by the nobility, the aristocracy, the people that owned the land and had, all the property and so on. They're the aristocracy. The noblemen of medieval Europe, for example, the barons, the dukes, the duchesses, all that. Plutocracy was another term they came up with because every city-state, there's so many of them, and they held different forms of government. But plutocracy is ruled by the rich. Often America is considered to be a plutocracy, that we have some rich people that have so much money that they basically, control us in a way. I don't believe that's true. I think we're a democracy and a republic, but sometimes people say, yeah, the rich people rule, right? Plutocracy. All right, so there's that. Then there's oligarchy, which is elitism. It's ruled by a few. Now, oligarchy is kind of tricky because it can be ruled by a few military leaders, a military oligarchy, or it can be ruled by a few business leaders, plutocracy, which is an oligarchy, or it could be, ruled by hereditary families. But it's ruled by an elite group. And we were kind of an oligarchy for our first, 28 years or so as a country, ruled by the rich, powerful landowning class when we were a true republic, before we introduced elements of democracy, starting with Andrew Jackson. And our democracy grew through constitutional amendment, changing our constitution, step by step. Women get the right to vote, African-American men get the right to vote, the under 18 get the right to vote. And so our democracy grew over time and became what it is today. So we started out as an oligarchy. Now we're a democratic republic. We still have elements of the old republic, but we now have introduced democracy, or the vote, at a state level. Now, democracy has certain strengths and weaknesses. All these governments do. And in the past, we had 85 lectures instead of 32. So we could spend some time on the differences between them. But here's the thing. Democracy can often unleash wealth and creativity. If the masses are free to participate in their lives, in their government, and saying how things should run, they're more anxious to start businesses or do whatever and to show themselves through a thing called meritocracy, where you can rise up based on your ability, which is really what you are. You're at UCAS to prove yourself, to prove your ability by hard work and effort, right? Expanding your intellectual capacity. You can lead a company, you can lead a group, you can create something, invent things. And that's what we call meritocracy. Whereas in ancient forms of government, only those that were in power stayed in power, and they were the only ones who could really make a difference. The average peasants, just live their lives in a very routine way. Anyway, this idea of democracy, the way it unleashed in Athens, became really a key element in the American Revolution and in the French Revolution. No taxation without representation. In other words, let the people vote, pick their leaders, and decide that. All of this kind of thing. When you look at like Alexander Hamilton, meritocracy. He was an orphan who took himself to the top levels of government. Washington was not bound for greatness. He created greatness in himself. And so this whole idea of Athens, Athenian democracy is kind of important. They were juxtaposed against a autocracy, which is like a super duper monarchy on steroids, where they have all authority. And the autocratic king, Cyrus the Great, was just the antithesis, say, of Cleisthenes. And so those are kind of fun to compare. And the Greeks love to compare because they were the biggest rivals in the world, was Persia and Cyrus the Great. Today, we have autocracies. For example, Russia is an autocracy ruled by one guy who has absolute total power and control. Putin. It's Kim Jong-un in North Korea, right? It goes beyond monarchy. Now, Kim Jong-un is hereditary, so it's kind of monarchy-like, but he has complete absolute authority. Ancient kings did not have that much authority. They had to give and take a little bit, mostly. So autocracy means there's no give and take, you just rule. And of course, Cyrus started the world's first empire, and things grew out of that. Well, around that same time, though, when they're doing all these comparisons, one great thinker named Plato wrote the first political science book, and it's called The Republic. He was not a fan of democracy because he saw democracy could be ruled by the mob, and he was worried about that. So he had a very different take on what good government should be. And he wrote a great book about it called The Republic, which is pretty thick but pretty cool. And there's a lot of fun things. And we usually spend like 3-4 days talking about the Republic, but this is all you're going to get. And so The Republic is one of those must reads if you do go into political science as a major. Now, the next one that we talk about, we jump forward in history. Now, Aristotle and some of those others, St. Thomas Aquinas, there were some others who added to our political theory. St. Thomas Aquinas gave us divine right of kings, that kind of thing. But we have to jump ahead to Machiavelli to get the next big book. So the first book was Plato's Republic. The second book would be a book called The Prince that was written by this guy, Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, this happens in Florence in around 1512. Printing press had just come out. And this is a different kind of book because everybody else had talked about ethics, virtue, and morality that should guide government, right? Plato talked about it. You know that we've got Rousseau and we've got Thoreau and we have Locke and we have Hobbes. All of them, including Montesquieu, were all about, proper principles of ethics guiding our government. Right? This guy threw all that out the window. He was a high-level diplomat in the Italian Republic, it was called, in Florence. It was overthrown in a coup by the Medici family, who then arrested people who were in the old Republic government. He was prisoned, tortured, and put under house arrest. That's what happens when you fall out of favor. Well, while he was under house arrest, he wrote a book called The Prince, which he was literally trying to use as kind of a resume to get his job back. And this is the Republic we're talking about, the Republic of Florence right here. Medici family, the wealthiest family in Europe at the time. You could say they were plutocrats. That would be true. They bought and sold the papacy, for example, Pope in Rome. Anyway, lots of stories there we don't have time for. But by the same token, he wants to get his job back. So he produces this book called The Prince, which is the first book of realist political theory, where he throws ethics and morals and values out of it. He just says, I only care about what works. And in his head, he interviewed all these great leaders in history and came out with the game plan of how you can seize power. Now, we don't have time to go into a lot of the details like we normally do. Usually this is a full day. We're going to give it 5 minutes. But Machiavellian became a pejorative, as this book literally was banned by the Roman Catholic Church at the time as being, wow, it's just out there. But when you ban something, it means people are actually going to be more interested in it. And so this book really is still around, and it's a very quick read. You can read it in just a couple hours, but it's also a must read because it's a warning of how you can be manipulated, about how people can lie and cheat and steal and make you believe, right? I mean, it's really an interesting book. But anyway, this is the most famous quote from the book. So we'll just give you one quote here. It would be best to be both loved and feared, but since the two rarely come together, anyone compelled to choose will find greater security in being feared than being loved. Again, we're getting back to that fear factor. What are Republicans afraid of? Why won't they come out and say, let's move forward, like the Democrats did 4 years ago? That was a painful loss for them, and yet they came out, and Hillary Clinton the next day congratulated Trump. Obama invited him to the White House the very next day, worked on a transition. What is wrong? Is there an element of fear among certain Republicans that they're afraid to say anything for fear of the backlash of the Trump voter, the Trump tweet, the Trump attack? I don't know, but it doesn't seem very American to me to be afraid of anything. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. His book was read by Napoleon. His book was read by Benito Mussolini, who founded fascism, who was basically the inspiration behind Hitler's Nazi party. Hitler adored Benito Mussolini, who wrote a discourse on this book. And basically, here is what all tyrants believe. The end justifies the means. That's the ultimate conclusion of this book, that you win at all costs, and then you can rewrite history. History is written by the winners. So win at all costs, and you can make yourself sound okay in history once you win. The ends justify the means. Well, that is a horrible way to think, but nevertheless, thank goodness we had other philosophers come along later to dispute that in the spirit of laws. Government should be set up so that no man need be afraid of another. So this idea of fear as a tool, a political tool, is has got to be overcome. And how do you do it? You split the powers between executive, legislative, and judicial so that there is no threat. Now let's look at Mr. Trump's assertion. I won the election even though he didn't. There was massive fraud even though there wasn't. I'm going to win whatever way I can in the courts or whatever it happens to be. Well, but look, we separated the powers long ago. So when he takes his case, some 40 of them now, they go to the judicial system, and these are appointed for life. Some of the judges he appointed. See, when you appoint a conservative judge to the court, these are people who believe in the Constitution. They believe in the law. That's why they went in to be judges in the first place. And they're saying, where's your evidence? You can't come to court and just say whatever you want, and we're going to back you up. Would they serve for life? And they are not afraid. The Congress now is moving along now with Mitt Romney helping the Senate move toward the future. And to escape this fear of this person who would destroy your political career if he had a chance, if you're a Republican and don't go along with him. Even his own executive branch, which he runs, is now saying, enough's enough. And his own attorney general, who has backed him to the hilt up until now, is saying, look, you're wrong. There is no widespread voter fraud. Joe Biden is president, won by over 7 million votes, largest percentage since Obama in 2008. And oh, by the way, you lost big. Not just in the Electoral College, but in the popular vote. And I'm so grateful that our Constitution was written with federalism in mind. Wouldn't it be horrible if the vote itself was controlled by the president who we were voting for or against? Putting the vote in the hands of the president, the executive branch, would have been a very bad thing to do. And I'm so glad they were inspired enough to leave it to the states. And so the states now, independent of the federal government, were able to determine the election. Now, if you look here, this is kind of an important slide, and I've never been so grateful for federalism in my life. Let's go ahead and look at it. They established local governments, of course, raise taxes and provide for the public welfare, that kind of stuff, criminal justice system, that kind of thing. But they also maintain your school systems. They're the ones that telling you, here's how we're going to do the hybrid model. They're giving schools the option to keep you safe because one of their jobs is to provide for public safety. They're the ones who are going to determine who gets the vaccine first. And thank goodness, I think we've got a great governor, Herbert, and a new governor, Cox, coming in that are going to do that job as best they can. But they need money from the federal government. So it takes, Mitt Romney to try to get money to us. And also here, conduct elections. Thank goodness the election system is separate from the people we are actually electing for president. All right, so we talk about this: monarchies with honor, republics with virtue, and then despotisms, would-be dictators, use fear. Okay, now that's kind of the end of the discussion of the Age of Enlightenment. Like I said, normally that's about 15 lectures, and you guys got it in bits and pieces over a few. Now, the next lecture we're going to give is on the economy. Now, the one thing for sure that we should all remember is that economies are fragile, and economies are important, that the government establish a good economy for the people of the United States. Now, we know this because when you read the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, which lists the powers of Congress, 8 of the first 10 have to do with economic factors. The economy was trashed when the Constitution was written. It was in horrible, horrible shape. And so they came together to get the tools to a federal government so that Hamilton, who became the first Secretary of the Treasury, could create an economy and get it working. Remember, we've been at war with the greatest power on earth at the time. With the help of France and other countries, we got our independence, but they blockaded our ports, they trashed our economy. It took us a long time to recover, and we weren't doing well as separate little individual states. So they wrote a federal constitution to try to pull it all together. And Hamilton created the economic system that we enjoy today. That's why we owe him a lot. Now, in the past, we would have spent some great time talking about how we went through phases of economic development, starting with mercantilism, with Colbert, a French thinker. Each of these, Adam Smith, Hamilton, come along as the economy is changing. Now, why is the economy changing? Listen very carefully. It's the whole key to the rest of this lecture. The economy changes because the technologies change. And as technologies change, we have to change the economic system along with it. Adam Smith is the guy that coined the phrase capitalism. Of course, we did a lot of capitalism here in America for sure, but then we also did a lot of socialism too, right? We did a lot of different things. Karl Marx introduced the idea of communism to the world in the 19th century. So every century, there's been a great thinker, John Maynard Keynes in the 20th century, as to where we go now in the economy. The problem with Americans today, that especially Trump voters, is that they are not living in a world they understand. To understand where they're coming from, you have to understand that the words communism, socialism, conservatism, liberalism, capitalism do not apply to the future economy. Technology has changed it so dramatically that the old arguments are all rubbish. They're all rubbish. Basically, it's time to move on. And when I went to Google, before I went, I had a friend who worked there, and he said, "Hey, if I'm going to understand Google, what should I read? Give me a book." And he said, "You got to read this one, Thomas Friedman. It's called The World is Flat." And basically, it starts out with this: the truth of the matter is, the United States after World War II had 50% of the economic capacity of the world because of the war. It was an historical accident. Germany was destroyed. England was harmed, France was occupied, Dutch were, Japan was flattened. All the world's greatest economies were struggling. We were the only ones that didn't have bombs land on us. So we became the great arsenal of democracy, and our manufacturing capacity was far beyond anybody else. So at the end of the war, we had 50% of the world's capacity. Now what happens is this: everything went our way. Wages went up, jobs, we could, and you didn't need a high school degree to go out and work for 50, 60, 70 bucks an hour by today's money. Well, what happened is the world catches up and the world has become flat. So now businesses are looking around the world. And remember, all businesses are international, for the cheapest place to make things, the cheapest way to ship things, the way to maximize profits. And when you look at all of that, the old rules don't apply. Some people want to go back to the 1950s when the United States had everything going its way, but that doesn't work this way. We're only 4.5% of the world's population, and the world now is caught up. The greatest manufacturing power in the world now is China, not the United States. It's totally flipped. So what does that mean for us in the future? It means that these old arguments about capitalism and socialism and all that don't hold any water. What we have to do is learn to compete in a global world. Now, I learned that firsthand, as did Friedman, when traveling to India. Now, I didn't go to India, but when I was at Google, all of our 5,000 or so employees, for the most part, worked out of Northern California. Google was an American company, if you will. That changed while I was there. I was only there a year. Within a year, half of our support was now in Hyderabad, India. Offices opened up in all over the world, and now it's 100,000 people globally. It ceased to be an American company. Now, when we talk about this, let me give you the story that really, really tells me that Americans think too small. And I'm going to actually jump ahead to these three guys right here. This is Larry Sergey and Mike Schmidt, who ran Google at the time. And I went to a meeting, which they allowed everybody to do with engineers. And it was a big forum, and they could ask questions of the founders and get great answers and so on. And one engineer gets up and he says, "Hey, I've got this great app." And Sergey gets up and says, "Well, how many people will that be used by?" He says, "Oh, 40, 50 million, something like that, you know?" And he goes, "You're not thinking big enough. Do not write any bit of code. Don't write any software that can't be used by 1 billion people." And the guy's objected. He said, "Wait a minute. The biggest selling software package in the world today is Microsoft Word." And that was true at the time, 400 million a year. And he goes, no, you're thinking too small, billion. Now, of course, his parents immigrated from Russia. They were Jewish and they escaped, persecution there. And he has a different view, a global view. And so did Mike Schmidt. He ran big companies, big corporations. Here's the deal. The United States is only 320 million people, and only maybe half at that point would have been eligible for really using Google products. So in other words, you have to reach 20% of the world's population or it's not worth doing. None of these companies are US companies. General Motors makes most of its profit, an American company, so to speak, manufacturing its cars in China because they're prestige there. Here they make trucks, but there they make luxury vehicles. Companies are global. Apple they have an engineering center, sure, in Northern California in Silicon Valley, but they make everything in China. Their operations in Europe are run out of Dublin. Their biggest profits come from around the world, and they pay very few taxes here in the United States at all, if any. And yet we consider them an American company. We live in a global economy. And what people responded to with Trump is, how do we get through? We want to bring those manufacturing jobs back. We want to go back to the days when 50% of all the cars in the world were made here, and we exported cars all over the world. That's over. That ended in the 1970s when Japan started to ship cheaper and better and higher quality cars to America. Germany now, I think Volkswagen is now the world's largest company. They invented the car to begin with, and they make the highest quality cars as a company. So when you sit there and you look at quality, you go to European cars, you go to Japanese cars, you go to Korean cars, right? When I was growing up, all the cars on the road were American made. Not so anymore. The world is now flat. So the question for your education, for your purpose in being here, is how do you compete in the new world? And don't get hung up on communism, socialism, capitalism, this kind of thing, conservative, liberal. Think about a global world that you have to fit into. So in the concluding part of this lecture, which will take about another 20 minutes on Wednesday, we'll go through what are called the 9 flatteners. The 10 flatteners and the 3 convergence factors. Now, I did post an article that summarizes it all for you. So when I post the study guide on Tuesday night, if you want to get a jump on that, you can answer all the questions and open up that little reading and get the answers. But I'll go through and work through it too. And since I know only 20% of you have done the last study guide, I'm a little worried that you're not going to meet the deadline by the 11th. So I'm going to hold off, and I want you to work on your research paper, that last study guide, and then I'll give you the next one on Tuesday night so that you can get done by December 11th. But understand that your world has changed, and the reason you're here at UCAS is to learn how to compete in a world that's rapidly changing. And what we see in America in our politics is a reaction against the future. And we have to embrace the future. We can't be afraid of it. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And we should not be afraid of the future. As Biden says, let's build back better. We can do it. We can be competitive. We won't be the dominant power we were economically ever again, but we can become great again given the new rules and the new technologies that are in front of us. And you guys will love it because they're great jobs, by the way. Okay, so we're going to stop right there, and we'll let you guys kind of, get caught up. And then we'll, like I said, I posted a reading that will allow you, if you want to, after Tuesday night, I'll post that sit again. If you want to get a jump on it, you can. Otherwise, we'll work on it Wednesday in class. Okay. All right, you guys, take care.